Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful. Hello and welcome to this week's On Farm podcast. It's Anna with you again this week. I've got one of my favourite types of episodes coming up. I love getting out and about on farm, but I also just love a good old natter. So this week we've got myself having a chat with a man of many hats, Gareth Baird. Gareth has very recently been presented by SAOS with the Ed Rainey Brown Award. So that's an award really for lifetime achievement within not just Scottish agriculture, but within the world of collaboration and cooperation within Scottish agriculture. So a really nice chat, and you'll hear much more about Gareth's life throughout the podcast.
My late father was a vet in Kelso, and he came down to Kelso in the mid-50s, literally bumped into my mother outside the vet's surgery, and things kicked off from there. Mum was an only daughter to an only child to my grandparents. By great good fortune, she was brought into the lease at Manor Hill, which has turned out to be such a valuable asset, for all secure tenant farmers with secure leases. So as I was growing up, we lived here on the farm, and I particularly liked working with animals. Hence, I suppose, on an arable farm, it's a bit of an anomaly that we still have suckler cows. There's good bits and bad bits to that, as everybody will know. But Dad always said to me, he said, make sure you have another string to your bow. He was quite specific about that, and I went through school and then on to agricultural college, which I absolutely loved, and so that fully meaning to farm, and that's the way it's turned out. And I've sort of meandered my way towards non-exec directorships here and there, which I've really enjoyed, and really SAOS had an awful lot to do with that, setting off on that course. And I feel really strongly about family farms, and they are under a wee bit of threat, and this present crisis is not going to help at all. But our parish here in Mackerson, I mean, it's absolute gold dust. We've got 4 farming families in this parish, all tenants, the same landlord. I've known 3 generations with one of them and 5 generations with another. The glue that we have within this parish is just extraordinary. And I know people look at it, with envy. And we've all grown up together. It's not very good for your liver, but we have an awful lot of fun. And I can see, so the discussion going on at the moment is amongst my age group is, how do we get our successors to work together and, take cost out of this fearsome machinery cost element and things. And the young men and young women are talking to each other in that regard, which is great. But keeping this parish together is just so important for us, and I try and when we get in front of politicians and things like that, and I have had, because of various positions, had the opportunity to do that. I try and tell them about the value of this long term landlord-tenant relationship, and that value would just, and sure we all want to own our farms, of course we do, but we haven't had the opportunity, and perhaps if we had that glue with this multi-generational element that we've got in this parish, wouldn't be there. So there's 2 sides to everything, really, isn't there?
you maybe weren't at the beginning thinking in the context of the way in which we talk now about collaboration and cooperation specifically. But do you think your passion for that maybe started right on your doorstep? You know, the fact that you work so, not necessarily work closely with your neighbours, but get on so well with your neighbours. You obviously share knowledge and information and innovation. So you obviously, even though you're not in an official capacity working together, you're obviously working together as a group of friends and kind of colleagues in a way. And do you think that's where it all started?
Well, it might well have, you know, and if you got caught short with a broken down combine or you needed a bull after an injury or something like that, you know, it worked. And maybe that was the spark. I don't know. And that, the other thing I feel really strongly about, you know, some of these smaller family farms, there's a huge opportunity for family members to bring income into the household, just as you're doing, you know, in your capacity. And I feel really strongly that there's so much resource and talent in our farming community. You know, there's a huge opportunity for family members to do that and really safeguard the family base. And I remember, you know, it's sort of 20, 30 years ago, the rush for acres was absolutely phenomenal. And I think the machinery rings and the development of the machinery rings have been really important in this. Young members of the family working at home are seeing other opportunities to bring money into the homestead, using their talents or their kit or whatever, and or having a completely different job and getting their neighbour to help out at home, however they cut it. And I think it really strengthens our community in that. So I feel really strongly about that. I don't know whether that's part of, you know, because of this parish and because of our tight friendships, and I see it happening with the next generation in our parish and it happening round about us. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you because I'm always, from a farming perspective, I'm always fearful of having all your eggs in one basket, as it were. So rather than just necessarily always trying to grow the same one enterprise, the more you can do to diversify your income streams, as far as I'm concerned, is a good thing, because then you're spreading risk, I suppose, as much as anything. And you're allowing everybody to do something about which they're enthusiastic, and to give them the opportunity to choose something that's of their own making, in a way, I suppose. So you were farming away in your younger years after you left college. You could have just carried on doing a great job of that, but there must have been something in you that was saying, I love doing this, but I want to do something more as well. So was there a moment that you thought that, or was it always inside you? How did that kind of evolution work?
Well, I was thinking about this just through the week, actually. In those days, and thank goodness the legislation's changed, so for tenant farmers, if you invested money on your holding, you know, within 10 years, it passed to the total ownership of the landlord. And I think that was quite restrictive. And we were working away, just in that regard. And we had the opportunity to join a grain cooperative. And it was very clear, as the capacity of machinery was growing, it was outgrowing what we could do at home at harvest and potato harvest and all that. And so we got an opportunity to join a grain cooperative about 15 miles away in Berwickshire. And then, again, mostly driven by tenant farmers, we, in 1982, under the chairmanship of the late Jimmy Jeffrey, we started up a seed potato cooperative on the outskirts of Kelso, for which we got enormous financial aid from the European Commission, which just allowed us to get going and build a facility with scale and really good facilities and what have you. So, and as that started to build, it made me quite curious about the whole co-op movement and the different way of thinking and all the rest of it. And then in 1995, got a phone call from Ed Rainey Brown, who said, I want to come and see you to speak about, would you like to become involved with SAOS? And it was really SAOS that enlarged my appetite around cooperatives and how we could hopefully help to drive the industry forward as well. So it was a sort of step-by-step progression, if you like.
Yeah, and of course, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to chat to you for the podcast, because you're going to get modest in a minute, I'm sure, but you were recently awarded the Ed Rainey Brown Award for a Lifetime Achievement Award, which I was there. I saw the whole thing unfold, and obviously that was an emotional time, not just for you actually, but for a lot of people in that room. I think it's an emotional award. You must have felt pretty chuffed, did you? Were you surprised?
Well, I was absolutely gobsmacked by the whole thing, because I've just had a change of circumstances down here where long-term loyal employees had to retire from the farm because of a dreadful sciatica. So I've sort of been having to man the decks, as it were. So I was a bit tight for time, and Jen Thompson, and communications manager for SAOS, and John Hutchison, the SAOS chairman, were biting away at me. You got to come to the conference and all the rest of it. And I just assumed that it was because of COVID reasons, it had been shifted to late March and there were shorter numbers. So I had put the tribute together for the last recipient, which was James Graham, the most important guy in Scottish agriculture for the last 20 years. And to think that I was sort of following him was quite a thought. No, it's just great. It really is. So.
This isn't just, they don't just pull names out of a hat. This is very considered and very much thought through. Am I right in thinking that your involvement with SAOS has been going on for a long time? I think you're the only person who's been the president and the chairman of the organisation. At the Crown Estate, you were involved quite early on in your career with the Crown Estate. Is that right? And what was your role there? That must have been fascinating.
It was absolutely fabulous, and I had 10 years with them. And I saw the advert for the post of Scottish Commissioner. So the Crown Estate directors are called commissioners, and there was only one geographic title in that, which goes a way back, and that was the Scottish Commissioner. And Sir Ian Grant was Scottish Commissioner and chairman of the Crown Estate. We were winding up in a positive fashion the grain cooperative that was involved in as much as the co-op farming were buying it from us. And I had sort of all hands on deck with that. And I got a phone call saying that your name's been, from a recruitment agency, saying that your name's been supplied to us with regard to the position of Scottish Commissioner. Would you be interested? So I said, well, that's kind of you to phone. Let me do a bit of research, which I did. And the more I dug into it, the more I thought it interested me. And it really rang my bell. And a lot of very similar ambitions and qualities that SAOS had. And so anyway, I threw my hat in the ring and got down to short lead and went down to London to the Treasury. I had a wee bit of time to kill after it was finished, and went down to the War Cabinet rooms, which are immediately below. And for any of your listeners, if you've ever got in central London, go and see it. It is absolutely extraordinary. Anyway, I came home, and they're not allowed to announce their decision because it has to go in front of, I think it was the Home Secretary, I think it was Jack Straw. However, I remember I was down dealing with some beasts down in the grass parks, and I got a phone call, and it was the recruitment agency, and all he said to me was, I can't see anything else to you other than you're not stood down. So I didn't know what to make of that. Anyway, so then I was appointed and started in 2009, and I just absolutely loved it, and travelled all over the United Kingdom, obviously a lot in Scotland, to the 4 rural estates in particular in Scotland, which I just loved. It was just a super time. And then in the middle of it, we had the independence referendum. As soon as the group got together to discuss what might change after the result of the referendum, we knew fine well that the Scottish Government would want to take on the Crown Estate assets in Scotland, which happened. And then so I was much more based on in a UK fashion after that. But it's a great organisation and very much under the radar. But it's a £14 billion balance sheet, and the surplus all goes back to the Treasury, and now from the Scottish assets, obviously, to Scottish Government. And it really does punch way above its weight in a whole lot of ways. And what you see, particularly with marine wind down the east coast of the United Kingdom, that's all Crown Estate driven, in as much as they're the landlord of the seabed and they issue the licences. And the cash coming into the country, not least the green power, is absolutely phenomenal. So it was a great time.
Yeah, well, if you can't spend your time doing things that are fun and interesting, then you're unlucky, aren't you? So that sounds like it was a good time. Obviously, primary production, being a farmer as well, primary production is key to you. But I know that you were also director of Scotland Food and Drink for a while, and so therefore you must be keen to get involved in and to understand and to promote the whole food supply chain from farm to fork, effectively. Can you tell us a bit about your time at Scotland Food and Drink and what you feel you achieved there and what it kind of added to you in terms of your career as well as the whole country, effectively?
That was a great initiative. I sat on Ross Finney's agricultural strategy group just around the turn of the century. So there was an agricultural strategy group where Ross Finney had thought that we needed a much better refined and targeted strategy. Alongside that, we had the industry strategy group, which effectively was the processors, and they were coming to the end of their strategy journey. And I remember so clearly Ross got members from each strategy group to sit down together in a committee room in Holyrood and said, I think you people have got something to talk to each other about, but specifically around the supply chain. And I remember very clearly a processor saying, well, I'm having to use Portuguese eggs. And agricultural strategy group members said, don't be so daft, surely there's lots in Scotland for you. And he said, there isn't. And from that tiny wee fact, people got going, and then we set up a stakeholders working group which met for 2 years with, again, members from the agriculture and industry strategy groups, and put the format of Scotland Food and Drink together, having looked at a whole lot of different models around the world. And it's been enormously fulfilling to see the development of that organisation, Anna. And I think one of the lessons that came from it, and there's nobody to blame here, but everybody expects these organisations to be up and running in 2 or 3 years, and it takes longer than that because you've got to get industry buy-in. And as the obvious value that Scotland Food and Drink could offer all parts of the supply chain became obvious to everybody, then we started getting buy-in, and then we started getting momentum, and now it's got to the great place it is, and James Withers, and he's just got a superb team there, so well led by James. They've got a cracking board, and they're making real impact now. And I think, for particular for many of the processing fraternity, the help that Scotland Food and Drink, the team, could give to them during this pandemic would have been absolutely invaluable. Imagine going into that without somebody there, supporting your corner. I mean, you'll recognise the worth of that with your profession. And it was a real example of when folk coming together and leaving their hats outside the door, of their own business, how you could drive things forward and make a meaningful difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I often think about, but occasionally, particularly now, actually chatting to you, kind of thinking about where would we be if Scotland Food and Drink as an organisation had never been thought of, if that inception meeting had never taken place. I mean, I dare say there would be something else in existence, but actually without it, Scotland would be in a far worse place. And actually, even despite the pandemic, the food and drink sector is thriving, largely in part to their innovation.
And Anna, I think there's another important point in here. When we started it off, it was obviously Ross Finney's initiative. Richard Lockhead absolutely backed it up, after the change in government. But there's a real lesson here in the private sector and the public sector working together. So government were enormously supportive financially in supplying the finance to get us up and running. And I think it was about an 85-15 split between public and private funding. And then as we began to develop momentum and built our membership and had all sorts of activities which were income producing for the organisation, as we were able to build that, the equity, if you like, in the funding of the organisation almost switched round the other way to the private sector being dominant. And then obviously you get challenges come right out the blue, the most recent one being the worst, obviously. But then I think one of the really good lessons about this is the public sector and private sector working together. The private sector were able to go to government and say, look, these are our issues here. This is what you can help to unlock this puzzle for us, remove the hurdles there, and we will bring in the solutions in behind that. And it's a much, much better way of working than everybody standing shouting at each other or barking at each other, And it has, I think it's served the Scottish food and drink industry and Scotland PLC, if you like, really well.
And just another example of people working together for the greater good rather than just to stroke their own egos or their own bottom line.
And Scottish Government deserve great credit for that, because it's unrealistic and unfair to think that ministers and civil servants have all the answers all the time. There's so much that industry holds that can drive things forward.
So as you say, Scotland PLC has benefited enormously from the existence of Scotland Food and Drink. But actually, I think Scottish Farming PLC benefits a huge amount from everything that you've talked about already today. And that is largely focusing on kind of seeing the bigger picture and working with other people and not against other people to the greater good. And whether that is, sharing a combine when you're stuck, or setting up an official grain cooperative. It can be tiny scale, it can be enormous scale, but Scotland PLC needs that collaboration and cooperation, doesn't it? Actually, not just within farming, but within everything.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It just reminded me, pre-Scotland Food and Drink and SAOS with James Graham and some board members, we were up on a tour with Ross Finney, and James Graham had put this fabulous slide together. As ever, it was brief and to the point, and it compared, if you like, the old supply chain with the new supply chain to which we had to move. So some of the old thinking was, after your primary product leaves the road end, then it's somebody else's, ownership, and if there's issues, it's their issues. And James produced this marvellous slide with about 10 bullet points on either side about how the old supply chain worked and how the new supply chain should work. It was a real light bulb moment in the direction in which we had to move. And it's much more, I suppose it could be simply characterised by, it's much more a pool now of the goods and the manner in which the goods are presented and which we produce, rather than the push, the old way of thinking where we would just shove things onto the marketplace and then, hope for the best. So there's been a real change in both product and the service that the primary production segment of the industry is offering, and that's been an absolute game changer. And I feel quite strongly about that gives us more influence in this. You'll not always get everything that you want, but you can start being a bit more firm, robust about laying down, what this product needs to realise in the marketplace. And of course, we're into really choppy waters with that now.
Yeah, many voices saying the same thing are so much stronger than just one, aren't they? Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between collaboration and cooperation and strategic thinking. Huge amount of overlap. But in John Hutchison, when he announced that you had won the Ed Rainey Brown Award, as well as many other words like wisdom, passion, enthusiasm, he credited you specifically as being a phenomenal strategic thinker. And I'm really interested in that from not just from a cooperational point of view, but from a wider farming point of view, because actually I'm not sure that enough people in farming are strategic thinkers, and I just wonder how can that be changed? How can we get people to think more? Because when you're faced with challenges as we are at the moment, it's really important, isn't it?
It sure is. Firstly, Anna, I've been enormously fortunate in that I was mixing with boards and people, listening to them and sharing ideas, and as ever, you get good dialogue going in it, and it makes people think harder. And SAOS has been particularly strong in that area, and that's their role. They've got to be the blue sky thinkers out there, and help our industry to develop. And that has to be good thinking and well articulated, not all the rest of it. So, and I think I also, earlier on in my farming career, I had a frustration, that often we were doing the same old stuff for the same old market, a bit about the pushing stuff onto the market, and we really weren't getting anywhere. And goodness knows there's enough variables in our industry with weather and currencies and regulations and all the rest of it to try and plot out a clear pathway. So I was always minded to try and change that together if we could. And I suppose that's what I'm no, that was kind words from John, but I'm no different from anybody else. We're all searching for ideas to go forward, but that's where the collaborative or collegiate manner of doing that I find so helpful.
Well, yeah, and a safe group as well, which is what SAOS is all about. It's about trying things, it's about sharing ideas, getting feedback. Not every idea is a good idea, but sometimes you've got to throw it out there and explore it to discover that. I often find, actually, particularly in COVID, I'll have an idea, but, working from home, there's nobody to run that past, And yes, we can do it over Zoom, we can do it over a phone call, but actually sometimes getting together in a room and sharing these ideas and throwing them about and throwing some of them in the bin and taking some of them further forward is incredibly valuable. Whether you're operating on a one business scale or whether you're operating as part of an enormous co-op, it's still the principles are still really strong, I think. Can I ask you a practical question as well? Because I think there'll be a lot of people listening who are farming perhaps or involved in other things, thinking, oh yeah, I'd be really interested to get involved with Grain Co, or maybe like to get involved with NFU or SAOS or SAYFC, all these organisations. But I think a lot of people think, oh, but I haven't got time for that. I'm a busy farmer. I've got family. I don't have time for that. So how have you managed to juggle everything over the years? Because it's pretty phenomenal looking from the outside in.
Well, it is a juggle. I suppose the biggest time is harvest time, because we have our own combine and all the rest of it. It's amazing how often when you had a meeting that you really had to go to, because you're paid to do so. So you have to go and honour that. And it's amazing how often it rained when you were going away. And you have the farmer's guilt, about, I should be at home and, working in a different way. But it was extraordinary how often the weather conditions weren't appropriate for that. For any youngsters listening to this, it's really important that the organisations you join, and you mentioned this before, you have an interest or a passion for. It's really important. And that you like the folk that you're working with and respect the teams of the organisation that you're working with. I think that's really important, and often that takes away any sort of guilt complex you have about not being at home, and then you just get home and you find another day to do it, or whatever.
Now, Gareth, I'm not going to give your age away, but because you've already done it at the beginning of our conversation. But I'm not seeing any imminent signs that you're going to be buying a new pair of slippers and putting your gold watch on and relaxing. So what's next for Gareth Baird then?
Well, it creeps up on you. Well, actually, I think it gets faster the older you get. But the time I was really involved with the Crown Estate and things, that was really full on. And after I stopped that, I had more time at home, and which I've really enjoyed. I really have. And then with losing my employee just recently, it really is full on this now. But it's great. You just plan it out, and get on with it. And I can pull in help. And I'm not going looking for anything, there's no doubt. But the Moredun at the moment is a time where we can really drive forward. And public concern around health, around zoonotic disease and all this, the Moredun Scotland and the other research institutes in Scotland have a huge part to play in this. And we did play a big part in testing both with human samples and indeed vaccines throughout the pandemic.
Yes, in fact, we touched on it in a couple of podcast episodes, which we did in association with the Moredun, and it's fascinating. I hadn't realised we were talking about equine grass sickness, but it's amazing everything else that came out that's being done over there. I had no real idea. It's phenomenal.
No, it's extraordinary, and all this great resource that we've got throughout Scotland with the research institutes. Clearly my attention and interest is on the Moredun, and there's so many opportunities and needs out there, animal production industry and for the Scottish human population, indeed for the UK human population. So a lot going on this now. There's a very ambitious strategy.
Sounds like it could be a whole nother episode in itself, so you might not be seeing the back of me just yet. Before I let you go, Gareth, outside of work, because we haven't really talked about that, if you were to retire at some point in the next 10 years, have you got any ambitions for retirement? I don't know, do you want to learn to parachute jump or downhill skiing or anything like that? What would you do if you did have a bit less time at work?
Well, I really enjoy my golf. And one of the things I've really enjoyed, Anna, Kirsty and I have been fortunate enough to travel widely, particularly to Southeast Asia, and I've just loved seeing golf around the world. But the bit I really want to see is golf around Scotland. And I've played quite a few Scottish courses, but I would love to, get into some of the more fragile areas where I know they've got great golf clubs and go and visit them and see more in Scotland. And to a large extent, that desire was hatched by my period as Scottish Commissioner, where I used to travel widely in Scotland. So there's an awful lot of Scotland undiscovered for me. And if we can take our golf clubs and have a bit of sport at the same time, that would be great.
Oh, Gareth, that's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much. Ed Rainey Brown Award or no Ed Rainey Brown Award, I think it's obvious how much you've contributed, but at the same time, I'm delighted that you're the recipient this year and just as delighted to chat to you. Massive thanks there to Gareth for taking part, and congratulations to him again for winning that amazing award. You will have heard in the episode that Gareth is the chairman of the Moredun Foundation. So if a little bit of science and technology and actually quite a lot of life-saving is of interest to you, go back through the On Farm podcast archive and search for anything with Moredun in the title, because we have done at least 2 episodes. I think it was 4 actually we did in association with the Moredun Foundation, so you can go back and listen to those at any point. But that's pretty much it for this week. As you'll know, the podcast is brought to you by Scene&HerdPR and Marketing. So if you have any types of communications needs, then you know where we are, and you're very welcome to get in touch for an informal chat. But thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next week.